Chapter 21. Confidential Information. As the sun slid from view and darkness settled in across paradise, the rainbow light stopped dancing on the crisis room walls. Amy showered and joined Kenzie to administer the last daily dose of medicine. Zahir was anxious about his eye as the dark spot was growing. The nurses could see it was noticeably cloudier. Uncle Louis quietly indicated to Amy that she should tell the professor. After everyone had been given their medications, Uncle Louis started to read Matthew chapter 1. In the softly lit room, his voice was quietly reassuring. One by one, he went through a long list of fathers and children. Looking at several penciled-in references, he shared with them that Jesus was a son who had been promised to both Abraham and David. On his mother's side, he was a direct descendant of the forefathers, and God, through his Holy Spirit power, had miraculously caused an egg in Mary's womb to develop into a son without any human father. Not having ever seen animals give birth, or humans for that matter, Uncle Louis had to explain the process that occurred in the big world, which then became a lengthy discussion. Once they were back on topic, Uncle Louis shared the notes Seth had written in the margin. Jesus was not the only miraculous birth in the Bible, he read. Adam was formed from the dust without any human parents. Eve was formed from his rib. Sarah and Elizabeth had children long after it was possible for them to conceive. God's incredible power to create a human being isn't confined to normal human reproduction. They had barely started into the account of the wise men coming to seek the newborn baby when Zahir and Ponzi drifted off to sleep. As much as Zahir wanted to listen to the story of Jesus, the burn victims were still in the recovery stages and sleep was essential. When he saw the two young men had drifted off, Uncle Louis stopped reading. "I guess that's it for tonight," he said with a chuckle. Kenzie wanted to have a closer look at the new gemstone in the moonlight, so he ran outside to check it out. Seeing that the other two patients were sound asleep, Uncle Louis motioned for Amy to come over. He was counting his days carefully, not knowing how many he had left. There were a few things he wanted to make sure the next leader of Paradise understood. He hoped they would get a chance to visit the cave together, but it was still a big undertaking for him to walk 5 minutes on a flat surface. The cave was so far away. Eagerly, Amy came over and knelt beside his bed. "Are you feeling okay?" she asked with a loving smile. "I've been waiting for a good time to talk to you alone," he whispered, his white hair glowing in the soft light beside his bed. "Oh?" the young nurse said, a little surprised. "Amy," he said in a serious tone, keeping his voice low, "you know I only have a little longer with you all." "Uncle Louis, I don't want to talk about this," she said sadly, reaching for his wizened hand. "Neither do I," he replied, clasping his hand firmly around hers. "But there are things you need to know. When I'm gone, you need to carry on educating everyone in Paradise the best way that you can. You see, Amy, we live in a tiny dome. The phone is a source of information that extends far beyond us and will help you discover many things. Outside of Paradise, where the professor and Evan live, is a vast world of human beings, all big like they are. Their world, the Earth, is full of beauty, with enormous mountains that are much, much grander than anything we have here. They have massive lakes and oceans, and thousands more varieties of plants and animals than we enjoy." Amy's eyes were big and round as she tried to absorb all this astonishing information. "You'll see it on the phone," he told her. "It looks enticing. You'll wish you could visit their big world in person. You'll start feeling that Paradise is very tiny and confined. But," he warned earnestly, "we can't survive in their world. Paradise is perfect for tinies, but if we were to try and leave Paradise, we would die in less than an hour." "But you were gone for a day and a night," Amy pondered. Uncle Louis pointed to the oxygen tanks that still lay near his bed. I had a special mask to wear so that I'd get enough oxygen, he told her. Without that on constantly, I would have died. But then, how do they live in it? Amy begged. Their world was made for them, and our world was made for us, Uncle Louis told her. Enjoy what you can learn about the big world, but don't become obsessed with getting there. I won't, Amy promised sincerely. I love paradise. I don't want to leave it. He squeezed her hand. I'm sure you will use the phone very wisely. Learn from it. You can discover anything you want to know, but just remember that not everything is true or good. Really? Amy looked up with surprise. How will I know what is true and what isn't? Compare various answers. Don't believe everything you see or read. Look for real evidence and choose what can be proven, he told her. With a pause, he added, Sometimes I've been fooled, so I try to always keep my mind open to the possibility that I could be wrong. In the soft, radiant lighting, Amy looked at him with anxious concern. If Uncle Louis wasn't always right, she was certain that she would mess up often. But Amy, there's something else I need to tell you, he continued. What's that? In the professor's world, there are people who enjoy unhealthy and destructive behaviors. Amy looked at him with bewilderment. Uncle Louis nodded gravely. The professor has a blocker on the phone in Paradise, he explained. If you see a dark screen that says website blocked, you will know that you have stumbled onto something promoting unhealthy and inappropriate behavior. However, not everything can be blocked. If you see things that make you feel uneasy, or you know that you wouldn't look at them if anyone else was around, then make yourself turn away. Shut them down. A part of you may want to search for more, but trust me, sometimes curiosity can destroy your happiness. Don't allow those dark images inside, or they will darken your life. I've learned this myself. There are things I've read and watched that I regret with all my heart. Good things are easily forgotten, but bad images and information are much harder, maybe even impossible to block from your mind once you've let them in. Use the phone as a helpful tool, but don't ever let it have power over you. Live your life in the real life around you. Stay active, keep busy, get outside. Enjoy your friendships here in Paradise. These are the things that will keep you happy. Alarm was filling Amy's eyes. I'm not sure I understand, she said wearily. Don't worry, he assured her, squeezing her hand lightly. You have a good sense for what is healthy and what isn't. Hold on to what you know. Uncle Louis, Amy said anxiously, what will I do when I don't have you to talk to? I don't know if I can handle all this responsibility on my own. He nodded. You will be able to talk to Professor and Evan. She sighed. But they aren't here with me in Paradise, she lamented. Uncle Louis, you must hang on. I need you. I am trying my best, he said with a smile. Then turning serious, he knew it was time to talk about her future. It will be helpful to have a good friend, he told her. At some point, Amy, you might decide you want to marry. And if you make that decision, choose a tiny who is honest, loving, and kind. You will need someone to help you sort through the truth and lies, right and wrong. There is so much to sort through, and it's always better to make these decisions with a trusted friend. 2 are better than 1, he quoted in a paraphrased fashion. If the one falls, the other can lift him up. Amy nodded sadly. She was quite sure she wanted to choose the one who had lifted her up at the darkest moment. But that someone loved someone else. Uncle Louis squeezed her hand comfortingly. Just then, Kenzie came running up the stairs. He didn't know he was interrupting a private conversation, and he was anxious to share what he had seen. Barely keeping his voice to a whisper, he told them about the dew-shaped gem and how it was still glittering in the moonlight. It's such a beautiful treasure, he exclaimed quietly, glancing over at the sleeping patients. I'm so glad they hung it close by. Now we can all enjoy it. Excited to see for herself, Amy rose to her feet. I'm going to look too, she said, and then I need to talk to the professor. Chapter 22. Marriage. As Amy and Kenzie attended to their 3 patients the next morning, one of them was asking questions about the things he'd heard the night before. "That was a lengthy list of parents and children," Zahir remarked to Uncle Louis. "How long has the big world been around?" "That list of generations goes back 4,000 years from when it was written," Uncle Louis told Zahir. "And we are living about 2,000 years since Jesus was born." "So there's been about 6,000 years of history," the young man calculated, "and our lifespan is about 5 or 6 years?" Uncle Louis nodded, explaining that people in the big world often lived to over 80 or 90 years. As Amy helped Kenzie loosely wrap new gauze bandages around Ponzi's leg, their very vocal patient exclaimed, "That's just not fair. They get to live so much longer than us." "Living for any time at all is a precious gift," Uncle Louis reminded him. "What you need to consider is how you will use the gift you are given, not whether you get as long as someone else." "How's your eye?" Kenzie asked Zahir. "No better," he answered. Amy looked down sadly. Late last night she had told the professor about the dark spot, and after he had conferred with Dr. Montgomery, he had relayed that nothing could be done. He felt the heat of the fire had likely damaged Zahir's vision, and it was very possible that he would go blind in that eye. Georgia and Lily popped in to say good morning on their way to help with breakfast. "How are you today, Zahir?" the tall blonde girl asked kindly. "Awake and alive," he smiled. I might not be in to read to you this morning," she apologized. "I'm going to try to surf for the first time today. Damien said to come when the water is calm." Zahir nodded. "Have fun," he said flatly. Amy glanced up to see a dark look cross his face. That hurt, she thought. "I love you so much," Georgia called out as she turned to leave. "I love you too," Zahir replied without emotion. "I'll be back soon, Ponzi," Lily called out with a big smile. "And I love you." "You're the best," Ponzi sang out. "I'll be waiting right here," he told her, and then he chuckled to himself. Later that morning, when Santa and Georgia brought breakfast to the crisis room, Lily and Vanitha tagged along. The 4 young ladies were freshly showered and having an animated conversation when they reached the front door. Overhearing her friends as she and Kenzie cleaned up, Amy was intrigued. "It was so beautiful," Lily exclaimed. "She was in a fancy white dress with flowers in her hair, and she had a beautiful bouquet of roses in her hand. You see, the girl who is getting married is called the bride, and her man is called the groom. A really good singer sang pretty songs as the bride walked up to her groom, who was waiting for her, and then everyone stood up. They made a promise to always stay together, and then he kissed her." "And this is called marriage?" Georgia clarified. "They make a promise to always stay together? They both make the promise?" "Ooh, I like this," Santa cheered, clapping her hands. Amy was very curious as to where her petite roommate was getting such information. It almost sounded like Lily had seen a wedding happen, not just read about it in a book. But maybe it was a book with lots of pictures. Or had Lily been in the cave? As the girls ran up the spiral staircase, bringing a breakfast of strawberry mash buns and fruit salad, Amy walked into the hallway to organize the supplies. She questioned her roommate. "I heard you talking about marriage, Lily. Where are you getting these ideas from?" For a moment, the petite girl went very white. She nearly dropped the bowls of fruit salad that she was carrying. Then she recovered herself. "Oh, it's just a book that I've been reading." "A book about marriage?" Kenzie asked as he came out the door to get another bottle of antibiotics. "Yes," Lily replied. "This is what people do when they really love someone. They promise to always stay together, and they have a celebration. Some people even have a big cake." Vanitha's dark eyes were dreamy. "Oh, I would love to do that," she sighed. With uncharacteristic sharpness, Kenzie replied, "Then don't get talked into anything less." "What do you mean?" she asked. "Choose someone who believes in promises," he told her bluntly, "just like you do." Picking up the antibiotics, he walked quickly back to the patients. Having overheard their conversation, Amy looked up at Vanitha with empathy. She saw the sadness in her eyes. They both knew Damien did not like rules or promises. Georgia took the buns to the patients. Lily had more to share. "And they give each other rings to remember the promise," she added, "and everyone comes to watch their wedding. Their best friends put on special dresses and stand beside them holding flowers." Santa danced around the hallway singing, "A promise, a promise, I love it, I love it. I'm going to do it." "If you make someone a promise, you can't change your mind," Lily reminded her. "Oh, I won't change my mind," Santa laughed. "Lima is mine forever." She took the fruit salad from Lily. "It does sound beautiful," Beneatha reflected, still holding her bowls. "Two people promise to stay together," she reasoned, "then I guess that means that marriage is just a special relationship for two, not 3 or 4. She looked over at Georgia uneasily. "Yes," Lily nodded with delight. "Just one guy and one girl sharing a house together." Beneatha was lost in thought as Georgia returned and collected the bowls of fruit salad from her. "And I love Ponzi's cabin," Lily smiled happily. "I'll miss the big mansion, but I like little houses too." She looked up in Amy's direction with a smile. "Then you can have my room all to yourself." The new ideas were swirling around in Amy's head. Marriage? Making a promise and not changing your mind? Leaving the girls? Sharing a house with a guy? This all sounded far more serious and life-changing than Santa's rule had ever been. "I'd like to see this book," she said curiously, looking over at Lily. "Can you please show it to me?" "Oh, I'll see if I can find it," Lily frowned. To herself, Amy thought, maybe I'll Google marriage. As the other girls ran off outside, Amy walked into the crisis room carrying the protein formula and balanced salts. Ponzi and Zahir were looking at each other with the same sort of curious surprise that Amy felt. Uncle Louis was smiling, but Kenzie was not. "What was that all about?" Zahir queried with a chuckle. "Are the girls making new rules again?" "This one may be a good idea," Uncle Louis laughed. "Making a promise to stay faithfully committed to the person you choose to love protects both partners from a lot of hurt and pain. At least with marriage, this is a rule understood and agreed to by both the guy and the girl. And if it's a public promise, then everyone else knows about it too, which is also very important." "But if you're promising to be with someone for the rest of your life," Amy reflected anxiously, "then you want to be very sure you're making your promise to the right one." "Well, of course," Ponzi laughed. "I know Lily is the one for me." Amy was not listening. "What if," she continued wide-eyed, "the one that you love marries someone else and you can never get them back?" Kenzie looked over quizzically. "Yeah," Ponzi agreed, "that would be sad. If you make a promise, it can't be broken, right? Promises can't be broken?" Kenzie shrugged, responding to the previous question. "You can always try for second best, I guess," he said in a matter-of-fact tone. "I would hate to be someone's second best," Zahir murmured. Uncle Louis rolled over and chuckled. "Second best is better than no best at all. In a committed, caring relationship, second best may eventually become the best." Suddenly, Amy noticed that Zahir was trying to wipe away tears. Kenzie ran over to hand him a cloth. "What is wrong with me?" Zahir questioned, forcing a laugh. "I have no idea why this keeps on happening. It's so embarrassing." Seeing that Kenzie was looking after Zahir, Amy excused herself and ran outside. Her patients were clean, well bandaged, and all the medication had been given out. She needed time to think through this new concept and do a little research on her own. Chapter 23. Research. Running through the forest to the cave on that gray morning, Amy heard another series of crashes fairly close by. She stopped in her tracks and listened fearfully. What is going on, she wondered. There was another crash. She saw 2 trees fall over on the far edge of the forest. Trees are falling down quite frequently, she observed. Why? Instead of heading down the hill, she dashed to the edge of the forest and looked down the steep side. At least 50 trees had fallen over, and their roots, very small roots, were sticking up in the air. Oh dear, she thought, I must tell the professor about this. Racing back to her usual pathway down the hill, Amy quickly made her descent to the shady valley between the hills. 2 more crashes were heard before she rolled the large fake stone out of her way. Pulling out the key from under her t-shirt, she opened up the door. Closing it quickly behind her, she turned on the phone and sent the professor a text. Trees are falling down in the forest, she typed. I saw at least 50 down, and I heard a few more crashes before coming inside. Most of the fallen trees are behind Rainbow Hill on the steep side, where hardly anyone goes. Is this a problem? Waiting for his reply, Amy hastily Googled marriage. Everything Lily said was true. There were pictures of girls in white dresses, videos of weddings, advice, and even articles discussing whether or not marriage was a good idea. Watching a couple of videos, the young nurse was astounded. It all looked so beautiful and romantic, just as Lily had described. She must have been in here, Amy concluded. How dumb of me to leave that key under the rock. Putting aside all the thoughts and questions about marriage, Amy chose to explore other questions she had from the books they had read with Uncle Louis. She was very curious about planet Earth. Just to see what would happen, she touched the microphone on the Google search. Evan had told her this was something she could use. Instantly, a white screen came up with the words, listening. Amy tried speaking to it. What does planet Earth look like? Dark space images came up instantly, with a glowing blue and green sphere, looking like a precious gem in the vast darkness. To her amazement, an unfamiliar voice spoke to her, saying that Earth was the only planet known to harbor life. 70% of Earth's surface was water, a fundamental element for the existence of life. She could see from the rotating sphere that this proportion was true. It's so beautiful, Amy exclaimed. Is this the world the professor lives in? And the Earth just hangs in the air, she considered. How is that possible? How does the water stay on it? Some of the water is completely upside down. With delight, Amy's spoken questions led her to find out that the sun is constantly pulling the Earth toward itself, but the Earth is moving sideways so fast that it circles the sun and doesn't fall into the burning star. When she asked why water stayed on the round Earth, some of the answers were very complicated. The word gravity kept coming up, but the concepts were difficult for her to understand. I can't make anything just hang in the air like that, she thought, astounded. This God must have power and intelligence beyond anything we've ever seen. How could this planet, this universe, just happen accidentally? As she continued her investigation, she discovered pictures of the moon, the seas, the multitude of life in the ocean, the mountains, the rivers. She was breathless, astounded, and fascinated. It was just as Uncle Louis had told her. It looked very enticing. Suddenly, paradise seemed rather tiny and confined. A reply came in from the professor. No, trees falling down is not normal. I am aware of the problem, but I'm not sure what is going on. I'll do some more research. Please warn everyone not to walk around on that side of the hill for now. If a tree fell on someone, it could hurt them quite badly. I will warn everyone, Amy replied. Another message came through from the professor. Amy, how are things going today? Are your patients doing better? Are their temperatures normal? How are they feeling about their injuries? Is Uncle Louis any stronger? Has he said anything about his heart? Is he staying in bed? Are you coping okay with your new job? I'm sorry for so many questions. All of you are on my mind most of the day. With a smile, Amy answered all his questions with fairly positive replies. She liked the little smiley face and the blue heart that the professor had added to his message. How did he do that, she wondered. With some investigation, she discovered the smiley face in her message box, clicked on it, and then realized there were hundreds of icons to choose from. Overjoyed with all the options, she sent back 5 happy smiley faces, many colorful hearts, and a hand wave. The professor returned a happy face with tears coming down. He was thankful he had put Amy in charge of the critical care patients. He was very relieved that it hadn't been a mistake to return Zahir and Ponzi to paradise, and he loved his little daughter. Staring at the emoji, Amy wondered, is he laughing or crying? Or maybe he's laughing so hard he's crying. After they said goodbye, there were other things that Amy was eager to research. Remembering that Genesis chapter 1 had claimed that man was formed from the earth, Amy asked, is man made from dirt? The answers varied. Some articles agreed that human beings were made from 13 elements found in the earth's crust, while others argued for stardust. It was confusing to sort through several contradictory arguments. However, most agreed that human and animal bodies turned back to dirt when they died. She asked about the Garden of Eden and looked at various locations where people thought it might be. Most agreed it once existed somewhere in the Middle East near the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Some felt that a global flood had destroyed the previous topography of the earth. A global flood? She pondered briefly. What's that all about? But there was an even more pressing question to consider. Who is God? She asked. Google readily answered her question, providing links to many sites. Amy read and read for quite a while. A lot of the descriptions used words she had never heard of before, like omnipresent and omniscient. Typing in those words, she found out that God is present everywhere at the same time, and God knows everything. Countless articles came up on the topic of God. The more she read, the more she became convinced that God was a well-known being or concept that was very prevalent in the professor's world. Why have we never heard of God before? She asked out loud. Many links came up to sites answering what would happen to those who had never heard of God, but nothing answered the particular predicament of the tinies. So Google has limits, she observed with a smile. Out loud she asked, what is the Bible? This time Google produced a multitude of articles to read through. Some links suggested the Bible was not really from God. Other links were certain it was from God. Her head began to hurt. Oh, I wish Uncle Louis were here with me, she moaned. This is way too confusing to sort through on my own. I need a friend. Turning everything off, she left the cave and ran to the shower. It was nearly time to give out the next round of medications. Chapter 24. Criteria. Evan dropped by to ask the professor a question in the Greenville University. Having heard that Jax had appointments in the science lab with 2 students who had failed the final exam, he walked down the hall expecting the interviews to be over. However, the professor was still conferring with one last student who was loudly arguing his case. It had been a difficult exam and marks were low across the class. Even though the exam had taken place a few weeks earlier, it had taken a while for the final term results to be posted and a date set to discuss the impact this would have on course selections for the fall. Needless to say, the current crisis in Paradise had left the professor a little behind in his teaching responsibilities. Seth and another student who had only just barely passed the exam were having an animated discussion just outside the lab door. Evan heard words like Jews, God said, and various other religious terms. He's at it again, he marveled. Seth is certainly not afraid to share his beliefs. How did you do on the course? Evan asked awkwardly as he drew near. Rolling his eyes, Seth shook his head dismally. He relayed that even after some last-minute tutoring, he had failed the professor's exam and consequently the course by only a few marks. Oh, I'm sorry, Evan apologized. You spent too much time tutoring me last semester. Seth shook his head. No way. That was great. I just needed to study more. The other student was still pondering the conversation he had been having with Seth. There's no way that anti-Semitism is on the rise, he scoffed. If anything, minority groups are better protected than anyone else in our world. There were 3 articles about it yesterday, Seth told him. The Jews are always complaining about every little thing that happens to them, the other student argued. They are no more persecuted than any other race. They are God's chosen people, Seth shrugged, which brings great privilege and heavy responsibility. And because God has singled them out, many people are jealous. This hatred is going to build up until all nations come against Jerusalem. The second interview terminated, and the belligerent student walked out of the room, mumbling under his breath, "Good thing your teaching career is over." Having overheard Seth's debate, the professor looked towards the door. He prodded, "God's chosen people? That's just one more reason to think twice about having faith in such a being. I don't like or trust a God who plays favorites." Seth looked over in surprise. "What do you mean?" he asked. "Well, what kind of God singles out one race of people above the others? How unfair is that?" "Do you really want to know, sir?" Seth inquired with a genuine tone to his voice. The professor was curious to hear Seth's answer, yet he maintained his tough stance. "All I know," he stated firmly, leaning against the doorframe, "is that a being who shows such favoritism based on race is not someone that I would choose to worship." For a moment, Seth hesitated. The other student said a polite goodbye and headed toward the main doors. Evan raised his eyebrows in response to the professor's challenging remark. "He didn't choose Abraham because of race," Seth began, frowning. "He chose him because he was one of the rare individuals who believed God and trusted him. God was able to work with a man like that and develop a family who would choose to walk with him. He wasn't looking for a pure bloodline. God wanted to develop a family who would share his values and promises with the rest of the world. Throughout biblical history, many Gentiles who believed in God joined themselves to the Jewish people and became included in their lineage." "So, are you saying that all Jews have this faith, this blind desire to believe without any evidence?" the professor challenged, raising his dark eyebrows. Clarifying one word, Seth said, "Faith is persuasion based on evidence, solid evidence. That's the biblical definition in Hebrews 11. If I read your translation of it? No, if you look up in Strong's Concordance for the meaning of the word faith." The professor shook his head with amusement. Undaunted, Seth answered his previous question. "The promise of salvation was never intended to be limited to Abraham's natural family," he stated with an engaging smile. "Right back in Genesis, God said that all nations would be blessed through Abraham and his seed. Anyone who chooses to have the same faith in God as Abraham did and to believe in the Messiah, the most important descendant of Abraham, can be included in God's family. Anyone who believes can become a spiritual Jew, an inheritor of the promises. Read Galatians 3 or Romans 11, the young man encouraged. "Then what makes the Jews God's chosen people?" Professor Lemans argued, as he absent-mindedly scrolled through a lengthy list of messages on his phone. "If anyone can become a Jew, then why specifically favor the race?" Meeting Evan's curious gaze, Seth took a moment to reply. "Okay, it's like this," he said. "There are two separate things here. One is that the offer of salvation, forgiveness, and eternal life is open to anyone from any nation who chooses to have faith in God and believe in the Messiah. The second is that because God made individual promises to Abraham, the Jewish family is the one that God has set up to be a witness for him to the rest of the world. And most of the time, they have been unwilling witnesses." "Witnesses?" the professor asked, looking skeptical. "How?" Evan raised his eyebrows. He was intrigued. Seth was happy to explain. "Well, for instance, the return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel after being scattered throughout the whole earth for nearly 2,000 years is a miracle that everyone can see. Read Ezekiel chapter 36 to 39, and you'll have evidence that the Bible is divinely inspired. What other book could accurately predict the history of one nation with such specific detail 3,000 years ahead? And we are right in the middle of it all coming true. The return of the Jewish people is all in preparation for the return of Jesus Christ." It was easy to see that Seth was getting rather excited about his testimony, and Professor Lemans loved a good debate. "Perhaps the Jews have read these prophecies and are just making it all happen," he surmised, looking up with a patronizing smile. Evan cocked his head, waiting for Seth's reply. "If it was an easy history to enact and orchestrate, that might be a possibility," Seth admitted. "But Professor Lemans, most prophecies concerning the Jews have come to pass against all odds, against their own will, and involve many other nations. Some of the prophecies accurately predicted the Jews would be driven from their land and scattered throughout the world. That happened in AD 70 against the Jewish will. The Jews fought against the Romans with all their might to stop this from happening. Other prophecies predicted terrible treatment from other nations, horrible suffering, mockery, hatred, and fear. Who would want to bring about a fulfillment of those prophecies? And in order to fulfill them, it required other unbelieving nations to cause the abuse. Seeing that the professor was still engrossed with his phone, Seth lowered his voice. Just think, Professor Lemans, he encouraged. When Israel became a nation again in 1948, as God accurately said they would in the last days, they were immediately outnumbered and attacked on all sides by hordes of Arab nations with an overwhelming barrage of weapons. The world didn't expect the Jews to survive. Many agree that Israel's victory in the War of Independence was miraculous. Terrible treatment for a chosen people, the professor scoffed. I sure wouldn't want to be chosen. They only receive these punishments when they turn their backs on God, Seth explained. God clearly laid it all out ahead of time in the Old Testament. If they obeyed his laws, he would elevate them and bless them. If they disobeyed, God warned them about the punishments they would and did endure. However, the Jewish people are not any different than the majority of human beings in all other nations today. Most humans choose to follow their own way and turn their backs on God, regardless of the warnings he's given to all of us. The professor had heard enough. I've got things to do this morning, he told Seth flatly, sliding his phone back into his pocket, and I still need to discuss a few things with Evan. That's fine, Seth nodded. With a sad look on his face, he added, I'll miss you in September when I give biotechnology another go. I might have failed your course, but you are a great teacher. I've enjoyed your classes. Turning to leave, he nodded goodbye to Evan. As Seth headed toward the main door, the professor's shoulders drooped. He was going to miss teaching. He would even miss his debates with Seth. But he knew he deserved such consequences for overstepping ethical boundaries. Following the professor back into the lab room, Evan didn't react, even though he disagreed. Instead, in a pondering fashion, he queried, I've been thinking a lot about the future of paradise. If something were to happen to Amy, what criteria do we have to choose the next tiny for communication purposes? Or what if she can't handle the responsibility on her own? Will we just put all the tinies' names in a hat and pick out one? Or do you have a list of requirements to guide our decision? As the professor stacked the papers on his desk, he was still thinking about his discussion with Seth. Absent-mindedly, he replied, Well, obviously, we want to choose someone we feel we can work with, who is responsible and trustworthy and can handle the temptations of the internet. Louie and Amy both want to do the right thing and aren't easily pulled in the wrong direction. Anything else? Evan prodded. With a shrug, the professor added, we also need someone who respects us, wants to receive our guidance and direction. Reaching for his leather bag, he added, and most definitely I would choose someone who has a genuine care for others and puts their needs above his own, like Zahir or Kenzie. So I suppose Odin won't meet that criteria. Jack scoffed. I can't believe you're asking me that, Evan. There's no way you or I would choose a tiny who would damage paradise just to see whether or not we'll respond. With a skeptical look, he inquired, what are you setting me up for? Evan was smiling. And I know you wouldn't choose Damien or the other Beach Boys. No, he smirked. They are too busy surfing to take notice of what's happening anywhere else. What about Charlie? Looking up, a sudden anxious look passed over the professor's face. He asked, Lors, Evan, why are you asking me about all these tinies? Is everything okay with Louie? Is Amy all right? For sure, as far as I know, Evan replied. I'm just curious to discover your criteria for choosing a leader. After all, we didn't have a choice with Louie, and we are very fortunate he has been such a wise, caring, patient leader. It's rather remarkable in every way. Louie did take a very helpful course. Okay, would that helpful course change Odin into a good leader? The professor laughed. No, I think not. One would need to start with the desire to be a good leader in order to benefit from the course. And what about Santa? She has a lot of good qualities, the professor agreed. She's very thoughtful, positive, occasionally selfless, and takes leadership initiative easily enough, but she hasn't sung songs of thankfulness at night, Evan smiled. True, the professor nodded, grateful that Evan had said it. But I don't really see why we need to decide this right now, he argued. Evan smiled. All right, we don't, he agreed. But I heard your conversation with Seth, and I wonder if you're being true to your own good judgment. With a look of surprise, the professor chided his assistant. What do you mean? Is that what you wanted to talk to me about? Avoiding the direct question, Evan answered. I thought you were hard on Seth, he explained, and I feel you were being unfair in your criticism of God. Obviously, God would choose to work with an individual who believed and trusted him and wanted to please him in every way. Isn't that the reason you've chosen Amy over Franz? If some of Abraham's family also showed these same good characteristics, would it not be fair for God to choose them to carry on this special relationship with him? But not all Jews show these characteristics, the professor argued. Rachel, for instance, doesn't even believe in God. True, Evan replied. And those who don't have a special relationship with him, outside of being unwilling witnesses that God's word is truth, as Seth explained. I'd say it is entirely fair for God to choose to extend his blessings through the Jewish people to the whole world, based on the foundation of the promises he made to his friend Abraham. It's something that I believe you would do yourself. The professor sat down in his chair with a sigh. Evan, did you come here for a Bible discussion? He asked skeptically. Or to sort out the criteria for leadership? I've got to meet Rachel in an hour to make a decision over the ailing polar bear. If you have something important to say, get on with it. Taking a chair on the other side of the desk, Evan brought up his real reason for coming. He had a question concerning RNA polymerase, and he knew the professor would have the answer. Although the professor had a busy schedule ahead of him, he was always willing to help his assistant with any scientific questions. A half hour quickly slipped by as they worked through the issue together. Chapter 25. Rachel's Text. Lying in bed that night, the professor scrolled through his messages. So many had been coming in that he and Evan had set up a weekly blog to give all the facts. Everyone wanted to know how Zahir and Louis were doing. Many asked about Ponzi. Some pleaded for pictures and sent donations, while others wanted to know when he would do another interview. The latest video he had posted of the Tinies hanging the rainbow suncatcher was going viral. Paradise has attained worldwide status based on suffering, he murmured to himself. How can this be? I thought happiness would be the selling feature, but instead it was Zahir's compassionate rescue and the terrible injuries he incurred. Gazing out his open window to the full moon that was rising above the leafy trees, he considered several unexpected events that had taken place since he had begun his experiment. There have been some major upsets, he thought to himself. The flood, my daughter's depression, the girls' rule, the dangerous science experiments, the fire. Setting his phone down on the night table, he thought about the fire. It had all happened so fast. Over the last 9 days, he had been insanely busy trying to deal with the impact of such a catastrophe. Yes, he admitted to himself, it was a catastrophe, purposely started by 3 of my tinies. It wasn't an act of God. It was arson. Unbelievable. And now he thought, Louis wants to read the Bible. How is it that my son, my wonderful, responsible son, suddenly developed this yearning for something more? I tried so hard to keep his life free of false hopes and restrictions, and ironically, he is prepared to give up everything to search this out. A beep on his phone caused him to look over. There was a message from Rachel. He picked it up, wondering if she had any news. He read, The DNA results came back today. See, here is our son. I am ecstatic. We are both so excited and very much in love with that brave young man. Farouk and I want to thank you so much for involving us in this project and allowing us to do this test. We are with you 100%. Is there any way possible for us to talk to Zahir once he's better, even if it's only a white dove call? We would love to meet him and be a real part of his life. And we love his name. Farouk said you chose well. Is it possible for me to suggest a Jewish middle name, just to acknowledge my part in his ancestry? Jordan, being our firstborn, is the namesake for Farouk's side. I would love to give Zahir the name of my father, Haniel. It is also his grandfather's name. Thank you, thank you, thank you, with love from all of us. Happy tears were flowing down Jack's face when he reached the end of the text. He was overjoyed that Zahir was a Khalid. Ever since Rachel had told him of her donation, he had hoped this would be the case. Knowing that the Khalids were grateful to have a son in paradise was deeply satisfying. Their friendship was very important to him. He pondered Rachel's request. They want to speak with Zahir, he thought soberly. Of course they do. But to do so means granting Zahir internet privileges. That would be easy enough if he and Amy are teamed up to communicate with me, but if she chooses Kenzie and Zahir is with Georgia, then I'll have a group of 4. Such a scenario is possible, I suppose, just less workable. For many reasons, Jax longed for Zahir to be his daughter's best friend. If I could choose any of the Tinies to be my son-in-law, he mused, I would pick the dark-haired young man with valor, intelligence, his mother's blue eyes, and a kind heart. Reading the message one more time, the professor curiously Googled the new name addition, Haniel. To his shock and deep consternation, the majority of baby name sites gave the meaning as God is gracious. All the Tinies' names had been carefully chosen by the professor 18 months ago to represent their cultural heritage. He had tried his hardest to avoid any association with the God of the Bible. Oh, what do I do? He asked himself as sweat broke out on his forehead. Rachel is begging for a small input into Zahir's life, as any mother would want, but Zahir has become the Tiny that has attracted the attention of the media more than any of the others. This new name opposes everything that I've said in the past. He pondered the dilemma anxiously. I'm sure that Rachel would love for his middle name to be acknowledged, but if someone discovers the meaning, the press will have a field day. Shuddering, he rubbed his face in his hands. Then, with sudden curiosity, he sat up in bed and reached for his phone. Zahir Haniel Khalid, he thought, saying it out in full to himself. I wonder what his last name means. Looking it up, he had his answer in a few seconds. Khalid meant eternal, immortal, to last forever. Putting all the meanings together, he said to himself, light in a dark place. God is gracious, eternal, immortal, to last forever. For a moment, he was too astonished to move. A heavy chill went down his spine. His hand shook as the phone dropped onto his lap. Lord, how could this happen? He asked himself. I thought I had barred God from my world. How can this message be living right inside paradise? Then he recalled one more thing. Louis is now reading God's book to that young man and my daughter. It all seemed so outrageously ironic, as though a power greater than himself had reached down and taken over the controls. For a long while he lay still, staring out the window, watching clouds pass over the moon as his thoughts churned deep inside. Perhaps, he fretted at last, God is at work in my world. Perhaps he is at work for good. What if he truly answered Louis's prayers? What if he saved the Tinies from the destructive fire that could have wiped them out? What if God is working in paradise to Save my family, not to harm them. Tossing and turning, he pondered this new perspective. Sleep seemed a long way off. Reaching over to his night table, he switched on the light and picked up Seth's 10 Reasons to Believe in God. The article had lain untouched on his bedside table for weeks. He perused it once again, less skeptically than he had before. I'm going to look into this more carefully, he promised himself with a wry smile. I will do a full investigation as any good scientist should. I will research the other side. And I will follow the evidence wherever it leads.